You are now locked in the Conspiracy Asylum. Your straitjacket and padded cell awaits. Your straitjacket, Conspiracy Asylum. Padded cell. You are now locked. Your straitjacket, Conspiracy Asylum. Conspiracy Asylum. You are now locked in Conspiracy Asylum. Your straitjacket and padded cell awaits.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy Asylum. This is DJ Schwartz once again. And once again, we're going to be doing a solo episode. And this solo episode is going to be on WWE deaths, or WWF deaths, wrestling deaths all around the world. At first, I was just going to do the Von Erichs, which the Von Erichs is going to be a huge part of this, but I'd like to go over a few, I guess, I don't want to call them smaller cases, but there isn't as much information and it's not as high profile as, say, Owen Hart or Chris Benoit, which we have episodes just dedicated to them too, and I'm a huge wrestling fan, so we're going to do this motherfucking thing, and we're going to try and honor these people the best that we can. But before we dive right in here, I want to remind you guys that we care about you, care about all the co-conspirators around the world. Especially in this episode, mental health is a key part of what had happened to all of these fine athletes here. So if you need help, please get help. The Suicide Lifeline number is 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. If you need help, please get help. Also, on theconspiracyasylum.com, we do have a link to the Suicide Lifeline page, and you can chat with a person live right there and then. And you can find listings of physicians and other mental health resources. So go check that out, even if you're not feeling down and out, so that when you do feel that way, because everybody has a point in their life that they feel depressed or they're feeling not so good about themselves, even if you're not feeling suicidal, go to the website, check it out, click around, see what you can find. There's stuff on there that can help everybody and anybody. And that brings me to my next point. We do care about you guys. If you want a free sticker and a postcard, just go ahead and hit us up, theconspiracyasylum@gmail.com, or you can hit us up at theconspiracyasylum.com, and you can give us your favorite episode and your opinion on that topic. Now, on the duo episodes, I think we're going to be bringing back trivia. So, a reminder, go back to the duo episode that me and Kim did last. That would be MK Ultra. And go and check out the question there. And you can answer that and get a free sticker and a postcard signed by yours truly and Kitty Kim. And also check out theconspiracyasylum.com. I've worked very hard on that website. Just click around, see how you like it. We've got an Etsy store on there. Go check that shit out. We got a Patreon page of $1, $10. Get you 2 bonus episodes every month. When I can get them out, at least. I apologize I haven't gotten any out in a little while, but I promise they will be coming. And ad-free versions of every single episode. Also, a 15% off coupon to our Etsy store. And check out the Etsy store, like I said before. Just go on the website, click around. If you guys got fan art, if you guys are good at drawing, if you're good at any kind of art, take a picture of it, make a picture or something for us, send it to us, and we will put it up on our fan art page on theconspiracyasylum.com, and you will get a shout out on the show. So do that for us. We've had 2 people so far give us fan art, and we appreciate every last little bit of fan art that we get from anybody, because we love it. I love the fact that people are enjoying the show. So we are going to get into the Von Erichs, but before we do that, I would like to go through a few other wrestlers that have died over the years before their time. Like I said, before their time, meaning that they died of nefarious circumstances. They died of suspicious circumstances. And the first one we're going to go over is probably the most recent, and it was Brian Christopher Lawler. It was Jerry the King Lawler's son, and he supposedly hung himself in prison. Now, for those that aren't really big wrestling fans, Brian Christopher Lawler was part of Too Cool back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and he also was Brian Christopher by himself. He kind of had the gimmick that his dad, Jerry Lawler, was his kind of manager at the beginning, and he basically denied that Brian Christopher was his son on air so many times, and that was kind of the thing that was going on when he first joined the WWE, or the WWF back then. Brian Christopher Lawler spent many years with the WWE. His most notable gimmick was Grandmasta Sexay in the stable Too Cool alongside Scotty 2 Hotty and Rikishi. The group was hugely over during the height of the Attitude Era in 1999. When they say that somebody is over, once again, if you didn't listen to the Owen Hart episode or if you're not a huge wrestling fan, being over means that the fans really like you. Now, I shouldn't say that the fans really like you all the time when you're over. If you're over, people respect what you're doing in the ring. If you're a heel and you're being booed for the actions that you're doing in the ring, not for who you are outside of the ring. If you are being booed just because you're being a really good heel, then that means you are over still. You're still over. It's just you're over in a different way. Now, Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmasta Sexay, Scott Taylor and Brian Christopher, with Rikishi, they were way over and they were huge faces. There was no way to turn these guys heel. They tried to be heel right away. Brian Christopher by himself was a great heel. He was just like Jerry Lawler. If you know who Jerry the King Lawler is, he wrestled down in Memphis for a long time, and then he came up to WWF, where he was one of the most famous announcers of all time, right up there with Gorilla Monsoon and Vince McMahon himself. And you got JR. It was JR and Jerry the King Lawler when I was growing up. And that was probably the best duo that I've ever heard. I mean, I could be biased because that was my era there. Now, on July 7th, 2018, Brian Lawler was arrested after police spotted his vehicle speeding and swerving. When police attempted to pull him over, Lawler refused to stop. When he finally did come to a stop, police said Lawler reeked of booze and had an open container of alcohol in the car. He was arrested and then booked into a Memphis area jail. His bond was set to $40,000. And then on July 28th, 2018, Brian Christopher Lawler tried to hang himself in the jail cell, and he was rushed to the hospital and put on life support where he would not recover. Sadly, Lawler had his demons, as was documented with various arrests over the last decade. Last month, TMZ reported that Brian Christopher Lawler was arrested after skipping out on a hotel bill, which is true. He did skip out on a hotel bill. And when they say he had his demons, it was the normal thing that happens to a wrestler. They get hurt, they get put on these pain medications, and they can't get off of them, and a lot of them either OD or their actions while they're high on the pain medication is what gets them in trouble. I would say it's more of the latter than actually ODing. There's a lot of people that have OD'd on it, yeah, but there's more people that have gotten in trouble just because of their actions after taking the pills, after doing coke or doing heroin. It's the actions that lead up to and are a result of actually doing these drugs that get them in trouble. Now, his early career, just really quick, It has to be difficult following in the footsteps of a legend, especially when you choose the same profession, and especially when said legend is still active in that profession. That was the position that Brian Christopher Lawler found himself in when trying to break into the wrestling industry in the late 80s, when Jerry the King Lawler was still a huge wrestler. Andy Kaufman and Jerry the King Lawler had a huge rivalry on screen, and it kind of spilled off screen a little bit, but Jerry the King Lawler to this day will say that he respected Andy, and he had a lot of problems with him, whatever, but that was a high profile thing with Jerry the King Lawler, and that was Brian Christopher Lawler's dad, was Jerry the King Lawler. So he had to kind of live up to that and fill those shoes, and that was really hard. As we know now, Brian Christopher, as he went by for the majority of his career, was able to find success of his own, but that outcome was far from a certainty. Lawler would get his start. Now, they say Lawler, and I think Jerry the King Lawler right away when I say Lawler, but Brian Christopher Lawler would get his start in USWA. He debuted wearing a mask under the name Nebula, one half of a tag team called the Twilight Zone. Wrestling's really weird sometimes. Christopher would unmask within a few months, at which point he created the moniker Too Sexy Brian Christopher. He would wrestle in this organization from 1988 to 1997, where he won their heavyweight championship an astounding 24 times and the world tag team titles on 6 different occasions. Once with Scott Anthony, Raven from ECW and WCW, and twice with Double J Jeff Jarrett. If you know who he is, he ended up in WWF and then WCW, and then he was one of the main creators of TNA and Impact Wrestling, and then within the last couple years, he has come back to the WWF, which people never saw that coming because when he left, he walked out like 3 times on WWE. So Jeff Jarrett, it's kind of crazy that he's even back now, but he was another big one, among others. When Brian Christopher hit the WWE, he was in the light heavyweight division. It was a new division in the WWE. The division was created to compete with the WCW's cruiserweight division. So we made our own, I say we because I was a WWF fan. The WWF ended up making their own light heavyweight title, and they had their own light heavyweight division. And one of the main people that they brought in for the light heavyweight division was Taka Michinoku. And Brian Christopher ended up having a rivalry with Taka Michinoku for a while. The light heavyweight championship went back and forth between the two of them, and it was very interesting because, like I said, Brian Christopher was an awesome heel. He was a good face too, but he was an incredible heel. And then he was in Too Much with Scott Taylor, which ended up being Too Cool later, but Too Much was Scott Too Hot Taylor and Brian Too Sexy Christopher, and they were called Too Much. It was really gimmicky, and it really wasn't over. And then something remarkable happened in 1999 when Christopher and Taylor would re-debut, this time under the moniker Too Cool, with a dancing gimmick. Scotty was renamed Scotty Too Hottie, with Christopher given the name Grandmasta Sexay. And they ended up winning the tag team championships a couple of times. They were with Rikishi, and that was half of the reason that they were over. And then when Rikishi turned heel, because there was a whole storyline where Stone Cold got hit by the car, and everybody knew in real life that Rikishi was The Rock's cousin, and The Rock and Stone Cold always had a rivalry. And in the storyline, they said that Rikishi hit Stone Cold with the car. He turned heel. And then in 2001, he was eventually released from the WWF when he was caught illegally conveying drugs across the United States-Canada border. It says conveying in here. But yeah, he was smuggling drugs across the border from Canada. I don't know what the fuck he was thinking, but he got caught, got kicked off of TV. And then Scott Taylor tried to do his best by himself, but he was not a single star. So he lasted a few years, and that's it. He ended up going to TNA. After WCW died, TNA popped up, and TNA was trying to compete with WWF, WWE, but they weren't doing a very good job. Too Cool reunited back in 2014, and he basically did nothing until the day he died. He just kept on getting in trouble, and then unfortunately, after he was put into jail, he said he couldn't take it anymore. He had a lot of mental problems. He had a lot of drug problems. And then he ended up hanging himself. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that I've heard of, he didn't really hang himself. Well, that comes up with every single suicide. So I spent a little bit more time on Brian Christopher here because Too Cool was one of my favorite groups back in the day. We covered Chris Benoit. We had an entire episode on him if you want to check that shit out. The Von Erichs we're going to cover here in a minute. I'm kind of going through the list here. There's several of them that committed suicide. Shawn O'Hare, he committed suicide at the age of 43. He was in WCW for a few years. He was a pretty successful tag team partner in WCW. And he ended up committing suicide by eating a bunch of pills. When it comes to wrestlers that have been murdered, like straight up murdered, there's only been about 4 that are really major. Dino Bravo, Chris Adams, Bruiser Brody, and Nancy Benoit, obviously. Nancy Benoit was technically an on-air personality. She wasn't exactly a wrestler, but she was in WCW. I don't know if she was ever in WWF or not. I don't remember her ever being in WWF, but she was in WCW both as Benoit's wife and as Kevin Sullivan's wife. But rest in peace to her. It's really fucked up what happened there. But Bruiser Brody's death was a pretty fucked up one here. And the reason I'm bringing up Bruiser Brody also is he actually trained with Fritz Von Eric, who we're going to talk about later here. And okay, this is his murder here. Aside from the Benoit murders, Bruiser Brody's death remains one of the most controversial in wrestling history. What's known is that Brody was stabbed to death backstage during a show in Puerto Rico in 1988. No one was charged with Brody's murder, and it is speculated why he was stabbed to begin with. The story goes that Brody was lured backstage to discuss business with Jose Gonzalez, a Puerto Rican wrestler known as Invader Number 1. An altercation occurred, with Brody ending up dead from stab wounds. Jose Gonzalez claimed self-defense and was acquitted in 1989. The knife used to stab Brody was never recovered. For reasons that are unclear, Tony Atlas, who claims to have witnessed the stabbing, was never called to testify at Gonzalez's murder trial. That's really fucked up. Jose Gonzalez's house caught fire in 2014, destroying part of a home, a car, and a motorcycle. The damages were estimated to be $75,000. I guess they were just saying what happened to Jose Gonzalez. I really don't give a fuck about him. Bruiser Brody was cremated. What was done with his ashes is not known to the public, which that's up to the family, man. I don't care what they did with the ashes, as long as the family did what Brody wanted to happen. But that was one of the more gruesome ones, that's for sure. Dino Bravo here it's an unsolved mystery with Dino Bravo. The Dino Bravo death story is one of the most bizarre stories to involve the death of a wrestler. Adolfo Briciano, or Dino Bravo, as he was commonly known by fans, was a well-known WWF personality in the 1970s and 80s. Nicknamed the Italian Strongman and Canada's Strongest Man, Bravo won the WWF World Tag Team Championship with Dominic DiNucci, but in 1991 he was forced to part ways with the Federation. Not even 2 years later, Dino would be dead at the hands of a still unknown gunman. That's fucked up, man. Especially because I'm such a big wrestling fan. when I hear about any wrestling death, even if I don't know the wrestler, I just feel fucking bad, you know? I feel like that's... I don't know how to explain it, but I see like the WWF logo. Especially if I see the one from the Attitude Era. And it's almost like the same thing when somebody like says your name, or you see your name written somewhere or something. Like if I see the logo for our podcast somewhere, which I've never seen it anywhere other than where I've put it, but it would be that same feeling of that's part of me. That's right there. And it's that same feeling I hear that a wrestler died. It's like, that's like part of me right there. So it's always sad to hear that shit. Involvement in the world of smuggling. After retiring from the WWF, Dino reportedly struggled to make ends meet. Related by marriage to Montreal mobster Vic Catroni. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, but Vic Catroni. Dino became involved with crime. Using his status as a wrestling celebrity, he smuggled and sold illegal cigarettes in Canada, mainly to Aboriginals. After a deal went bad, it is believed that Dino angered the mafia and that his death was the price to be paid. Oh my God. Now the events surrounding his death. Dino was killed on Wednesday, March 10th, 1993. The story goes that while his wife was taking his daughter to ballet class, he sat down to watch a hockey game on television and ended up shot 17 times with 7 hits to the head and 10 to the torso. Holy shit. That's like more than one gunman. That fucking has to be. Unless it's somebody with like a fucking Tommy gun just going up and down his body. Like, that's crazy. The crime remains an unsolved murder to this day. However, it is widely accepted that Dino's involvement in smuggling was the reason for his death, as there were no signs of a break-in and no footprints outside the door of the home. There is speculation that Dino knew his killer and that the person was watching hockey with him when the assassination happened. While this cannot be confirmed, what is certain is that Dino's wife found him later that evening when she returned home with their daughter. God damn. So yeah, he might have been killed by the mob. That might have been a story there. And one more here before we get into the Von Erichs. I swear to God, we'll get into Von Erichs after this. This is Chris Adams. He died at the age of 46. He was born in 1955, died in 2001. Chris Adams, best known to his wrestling fans as Gentleman Chris Adams, was fatally shot on October 7th, 2001 during an altercation in his friend's Waxahachie, Texas home. Waxahachie. If you're from Texas, let me know how you pronounce that shit, but it looks like Waxahachie. Reported as a drunken brawl, the shooter was Brent Boo-Raw Parnell, a fellow wrestler and friend of Adams. Jesus Christ, not a very good friend. Parnell was ultimately acquitted of the charges on self-defense. Now, Chris Adams was a national judo champion 3 times in England. Many with Adams' background in the combat sports stick their nose up at professional wrestling, but Chris Adams embraced it, which is very true. There's a lot of people in MMA that look at professional wrestling and they say, oh, it's fake, and it's for fucking losers and nerds and just fucking people that can't really fight. I like for you to say that shit to, like, Kurt Angle or Brock Lesnar, which Brock Lesnar actually kicked ass in UFC. Kurt Angle never tried his hand at that, but I can guarantee you, if they would have caught him in 97, right after the Olympics and shit like that, he was one of the baddest men on earth. He would have been able to kill any of those fucking punks that are in the ring right now. A few months prior to his death, Adams told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram that professional wrestling, he means, it appealed to me, the theatrics mixed with athletic ability, which is exactly what draws me to it, basically, is it's got all the drama, and then it's also got a lot of action. Adams wrestled briefly in England before immigrating to the United States in the early 80s. He was a part of the dynamic duo in WCCW, which it wasn't WCW, but WCCW. And his finishing move back then was a super kick, which, if you know what Sweet Chin Music that Shawn Michaels does, that was his finisher. He had somewhat of success in WCCW. He also had some run-ins with the law. Chris Adams' life had become a whirlwind prior to his death. He was awaiting trial on a manslaughter charge stemming from an incident a year and a half prior where Adams and his girlfriend were both found unconscious in a Dallas apartment. The two were partying all night the night before and had overdosed on a mixture of GHB and alcohol. Jesus. GHB is like roofies, y'all. That's really... I don't understand that. Adams would recover his girlfriend, Linda Kafangst. It's about as close as I'm going to get. Would not be so lucky. In the months following the death of Kafangst, Adams was hospitalized for depression and undergoing counseling. Friends said that he owed the IRS over $50,000. So after his drunken altercation on October 7th, 2001, where he got shot by his so-called friend, he was buried at the Oak Grove Memorial Gardens in Irving, Texas. The plot is located in the Garden of Faith, Lawn Crypt A17, if you want to go visit them, I guess. But rest in peace to all four of those guys. Or all three of those guys. And Nancy Benoit, I'm not going to go over that again. If you want to go and look at our Chris Benoit episode, you'll see exactly how she died. It was in a horrible, horrible fucking way. And I'm hoping Chris Benoit is burning in fucking hell for it. But on to the Von Erichs. The Von Eric family was a very famous family in the wrestling world, not in just WWF, but also in WCW, and plenty of the territories that you might have heard me go over in the Owen Hart episode. If you want to go into like a kind of a deep dive into the way the wrestling world works, I kind of rolled that into the Owen Hart episode unintentionally, so rolled a lot of the wrestling terminology into that episode. So if you want a little bit deeper dive into that shit, that's definitely an episode you want to check out. If you're not a huge wrestling fan, maybe you won't like it as much, or if you're curious about wrestling and how it works, that's actually a pretty good episode. Had a lot of good feedback from that one and the Chris Benoit one because I just know a lot about wrestling, so... But the Von Erichs, and this would be comparable to the Hart family. So I was about to say the Hart Foundation, but the Hart family, which was Stu Hart, and of course his sons Bret Hart and Owen Hart. An Owen Hart episode I already did, and he unfortunately died before his time. And it was an unfortunate accident that was technically live TV on a pay-per-view, but it was never aired. So, but the Von Erichs, they had a horrible string of luck. You would call this basically a curse. It rivals the Kennedy curse. If you want to compare it to anything, it's just like the Kennedy curse. Now, let's go over who they are. Now, the patriarch of the family, Fritz Von Eric, he is the father, he is the daddy. And he had 5 sons. Kevin Von Eric, David Von Eric, Carrie Von Erich, Mike Von Eric, and Chris Von Eric. And only one of them are living to this day. And it's not like they were born a long time ago. There is a 3rd generation of Von Erichs, and it's not to put it lightheartedly or make a joke about it, but it's amazing that there is a 3rd generation because of what happened to all of these guys and the fact that most of them didn't live to see 40, you know? So let's start off with Fritz Von Eric. It's a good place to start. Much like Stu Hart, he had pushed his boys to be in wrestling, and he pushed them hard, but he still was a loving, caring father. Fritz Von Eric was born on August 16th, 1929, in Jewett, Texas. Standing 6'4" and weighing 240 pounds, Fritz was an imposing figure who quickly became a top heel in the wrestling business due, in no small part, to his devastating finishing maneuver, the Iron Claw, where he just grab your face. Man, I love wrestling. That's one of the reasons I do too. Originally, he was trained by Stu Hart. Fritz became a top star in many National Wrestling Alliance promotions, NWA, which is a wrestling promotion, and there was a bunch of sub-promotions that branched off from NWA. Most notably in St. Louis and in World Class Championship Wrestling, WCCW, which we mentioned that in one of the other deaths of wrestlers, one of the other unfortunate deaths. He held a variation of the AWA World Heavyweight title at one time in the 1960s, and the fact that I'm from Minnesota, I know about AWA. AWA is it's a Minnesota promotion. Vern Gagne, if you've ever heard of him, that's the promotion that he ran. Despite never winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, he maintained his presence within the alliance, holding many other major belts. Fritz also served shortly as NWA president in the 1970s, as well as a president of WCCW when it moved to Dallas, Texas. Fritz was also a major part of a Japanese wrestling where he was known as Tensu no Sumi, in English, the Iron Claw, named after his finisher, and helped rebuild the business after the death of Riki Dozen. I'm nailing these names pretty good here. But just to say something about Japanese wrestling, now only second to the U.S., Japan is probably one of the biggest hotbeds for professional wrestling. People that can't find work here in the WWF or, say, TNA or AEW now, which I want to look more into AEW and maybe do an episode on them eventually here. But we'll focus on the little more known stuff here. If you're not making it here, or if you just don't like the style here, you can go to Japan where you can wrestle and you don't have to do promos over there, because they concentrate more on the actual wrestling than the promos. Now, I'm a type of wrestling fan that I like a good balance of both, so it's to each its own right there. Fritz is the father of the other members of the Von Eric family and the grandfather of Kevin's son Ross and Carrie's daughters Lacey and Holly. He died of lung cancer, which spread to his brain in 1997. Now, Jack Atkinson Jr., that was Fritz Von Eric's first son, and he died accidentally after being electrocuted and drowning in a puddle at the age of 7 in Niagara Falls, Ontario, as we learned in the Triumph and Tragedy of WCCW DVD. Yeah, if you watch the Triumph and Tragedy of WCCW, it's a very sad story, and they kind of outline a lot of this stuff that we're going to go over today. And his first son, Jack Atkinson Jr., no disrespect to him if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly. So he drowned in a puddle after being electrocuted. There's more details to that story. It was a complete accident. It was a freak accident. And I really feel especially for Fritz Von Eric. I really feel for him because he had to watch and bury most of his sons before he died. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to do that once. He had to do it 4 times. Kevin Von Eric. He was born May 15th, 1957 in Bellevue, Illinois. The Golden Warrior, Kevin Von Eric, is the second oldest of the sons of Fritz Von Eric. When all these guys got into wrestling, he was the oldest, was Kevin Von Eric, because of the other son dying when he was 7, Jack Jr. I think that was Fritz Von Eric's real name was Atkinson. That's why his kid's name was Jack Atkinson Jr. I think his name was John Atkinson or Jack Atkinson. The majority of Kevin's career was spent working in world-class championship wrestling, where he had many memorable feuds against legendary wrestlers such as Chris Adams, the Fabulous Freebirds, and Ric Flair. Chris Adams was one of the ones that got murdered that we went over earlier. It was there that Kevin became known for utilizing the body scissors and the iron claw as his trademark maneuvers, as well as wrestling barefoot. Weird. I think he was the one that he just actually forgot his shoes one day, or like forgot his boots or something, and he ended up wrestling barefoot once, and then he just started wrestling barefoot all the time. I'm pretty sure that's the story behind it. Now, Kevin retired in 1995 and is now settled down with his family and working in real estate. He has been married for over 25 years and has 2 daughters, 2 sons, and a grandchild. He occasionally makes appearances in wrestling shows, but never wrestles. He is the sole survivor of the sons of Fritz Von Eric. Though he remained in Texas for several years after his retirement, Kevin and his family eventually moved to Hawaii. Yeah, I mean, you gotta feel like shit, man. I'm glad that this guy's living his life and he's moving on with his life, because the worst thing he could do would be beating himself up because of this. But he has to be very strong to be able to not follow in his brother's footsteps. You know, even though they're his younger brothers, he's still, you know, he could have followed suit and ended up killing himself just like the rest of them did, or we'll go through it, but there's some extenuating circumstances, we'll say. In May of 2006, Kevin sold the world-class footage to Vince McMahon and World Wrestling Entertainment. But by July 2006, Kevin had made 2 brief appearances at WWE shows when they filmed in Dallas, one before the sale and one after. In his first appearance at WWE Homecoming, he beat down Rob Conway with several other legends, even applying the legendary Von Eric Claw. He also made a brief appearance on the July 15th, 2006 episode of WWE's Saturday Night's Main Event. I don't know if you guys remember Sunday Night Heat. People that don't even know wrestling that well know that there is Monday Night Raw, and then it was Thursday Night SmackDown for a while. Now it's Tuesday night, whatever. And then there's SmackDown. WWE Saturday Night's Main Event was a chance for younger wrestlers, lesser known wrestlers, to wrestle on TV and get some exposure. So he appeared on that show. Kevin still owns Southwest Sports Inc., which distributed its syndicated world-class broadcasts as well as Championship Sports. Kevin still owns Southwest Sports Inc., which is renamed K.R. Atkinson Enterprises Inc. Kevin now hosts WWE's 24/7 show and history of WCCW, along with Michael Hayes, because Michael Hayes was in the Freebirds, and the Freebirds were part of WCCW. There were several wrestlers that ended up going through there. It's kind of cool to watch that stuff. I've watched a lot of that stuff on the WWE network. I know it seems like I plug that shit all the time. I'm not trying to plug it, but I'm an old school wrestling fan, so I really enjoy watching it. All right, so here comes the sadness. Here comes the, oh man, this is a bumpy road, guys. That's for sure. David Von Erick, the Yellow Rose of Texas. David Von Erick is the 3rd son of Fritz Von Eric and was born on July 22nd, 1958 in Dallas, Texas. David had many memorable feuds, mostly in Fritz's world-class championship wrestling promotion. It is there where he had faced off with Harley Race and later Ric Flair several times for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, but he never won it. As well as he teamed with his brothers Kevin and Carrie against the Fabulous Freebirds. David also wrestled in Missouri, winning the Missouri Heavyweight Championship on a couple of occasions. Now, you're going to hear Ric Flair a lot. Ric Flair was a fucking workhorse. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He is one of the best wrestlers ever to live. And he's still pumping, he's still going. Thoughts and prayers out to him because it seems like he's in the hospital a lot. David died in 1984, reportedly shortly before he was booked to win the NWA World Heavyweight title from Ric Flair. Although many insist that before he died, David had scheduled to carry the NWA belt, there has never been anything concrete to substantiate that fact, nor have any NWA board members come out and confirm this story. So they're saying that obviously, if you don't know wrestling, they're saying that they were planning on putting the belt on him, which means that making him win the belt, and because all of the outcomes are predetermined, and that's why people do call wrestling fake. I don't call it fake because they take real bumps, they take real risks in the ring. I can't straight up call it fake. Now, the fact that the outcome is predetermined, I can understand that part, but yeah, I'm not going to go off on that. I'm just going to say that they were putting the belt on him, reportedly. Now, reportedly and actually confirming it, two very different things. Dave Meltzer does it a lot. There's a lot of other wrestling reporters that do it that say, oh, we have a source that says this. And it's just like any other kind of news outlet. What is the source? It's the source comes from nowhere, and you find that out pretty quick. The official doctor's report states he died of acute enteritis, but Ric Flair stated in his autobiography to be the man that everyone in wrestling believes, quote, everyone in wrestling believes it was a drug overdose that really killed him, and that Bruiser Brody, a fellow wrestler who found David, disposed of the narcotics by flushing them down a toilet before the police arrived. Bruiser Brody was another one on our list, surprisingly, that he ended up being murdered. He was the one that was murdered backstage by somebody. He got stabbed a bunch of times. Mick Foley also claims that he died from an apparent drug overdose. Brody, a close fan of the Von Erichs, would later admit that he overreacted in the moment of a tragedy and flushed David's pain pills down the toilet. It has been confirmed that David Von Erich's official cause of death was a heart attack caused by ruptured intestines, which were the result of acute enteritis. So it could have been a drug overdose. That's what sucks about these situations, trying to figure out exactly what happened to these people, because if they die of a drug overdose, obviously it's not the drug that kills them, it's their body reacting to it. So there might be some reactions to that drug that could be similar to something else happening to you, which may cause them to say, well, there was no evidence of any drugs around, so we're not going to say it's a drug overdose. And if they get the toxicology report and they do it too late, then they're not going to find the drugs in his system, and they're going to be like, well, okay, then it was a heart attack, you know? They're not going to spend years on it trying to figure it out. A tribute show was held a couple months later in his honor, during which his younger brother, Carrie Von Erich, won the NWA title from Ric Flair. Woo! Give him one woo. Carrie Von Erich. Now, this is one that you may remember. Carrie Von Erich was debatably one of the more famous Von Erichs, at least for me. He was before my time, obviously. I knew about him. He was the Texas Tornado, so I knew about him being in the WWF. Carrie Von Erich is the fourth of the Fritz Von Erick sons. He was born on February 3rd, 1960 in Niagara Falls, New York. Known as the modern-day Warrior and the Texas Tornado, Carrie was by far the best known of the Von Erich family. Much like his brothers, Carrie spent the majority of his career wrestling in world-class championship wrestling. He had several major feuds. One of them was against Gino Hernandez, another one Iceman Parsons, Chris Adams, and the Fabulous Freebirds. Chris Adams, again, unfortunately, was another one that was murdered. Carrie became the most successful of the Von Erich family when he won the NWA World Heavyweight title from Ric Flair at the David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions, a tribute show to his deceased older brother. We talked about that a little bit. Carrie lost the title 3 weeks later to Flair. Carrie also wrestled for several months in both the World Wrestling Federation and Global Wrestling Federation, two national promotions that were rising to fame at the expense of regional promotions such as WCCW. Now, what they're talking about right there, now GWF and WWF, they were two wrestling promotions that were similar to the NWA, where they took a bunch of territories and smashed them together and dissolved them all, and then dissolved them into the WWF and dissolved some into the GWF. So these territories were starting to die because the little regional territories couldn't thrive and survive because it wasn't like it used to be where you could trade wrestlers. You could trade wrestlers with other promotions in other territories and have their champion at one of your shows and your champion at one of their shows and stuff like that. There was a lot more people involved. There's a lot more corporations involved in sponsorships. And these little promotions like WCCW would eventually just be bought out because they couldn't thrive. They didn't have wrestlers. They were all going to GWF and WWF. And then soon WCW, which that's what killed the NWA, was when WCW, not WCCW, but WCW World Championship Wrestling with Eric Bischoff, when they took off in the mid-90s, when they really took off and they got Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and all of them, and they really took off, that's when it started killing a lot of these little promotions like the NWA. And the NWA was dissolved and it was gone, but they actually used the championship on WWF television, which was weird because a lot of the NWA stars ended up going to WCW, and one of the NWA stars was Sting. If you know who Sting is, he's got the black and white makeup, and this is back in his surfer days is when he went to WCW. And same thing with Ric Flair. Ric Flair, again, he was in NWA, and also AWA and other promotions and stuff too, but he ended up going to WCW. On June 4th, 1986, Carrie was in a motorcycle accident that nearly ended his life. With a dislocated hip and a badly injured right leg, Carrie was in bad shape. Doctors tried hard but could not save his foot, eventually amputating it. According to brother Kevin, Carrie injured the foot following the surgery by attempting to walk on it prematurely, thus forcing the doctors to amputate it. He was able to continue wrestling after the accident with a prosthetic, and until his death kept the amputation secret to the majority of fans and even fellow competitors. Yeah, I didn't even know he's missing a foot. I've seen tapes of him wrestling. I didn't even know he was missing a foot. Carrie had a history of drug problems. Amongst the many of them were 2 arrests, the first of which resulted in probation. After the second, which violated the probation and likely would have resulted in extensive jail time, Carrie committed suicide by a shot to the heart in 1993 on his father's ranch. Yeah, he just went in the backyard and shot himself. It's pretty fucked up. And he shot himself in the heart, which is just like, it's really weird. I thought it was really weird. Now, Mike Von Eric. Mike Von Eric was born on March 2nd, 1964 in Dallas, Texas. He was the 5th of the Von Erich sons. Mike replaced Dave in the feud of the Von Erichs had with the Fabulous Freebirds following David's death. According to the DVD Heroes of World Class, Mike wanted to work for World Class as a cameraman and had no interest in being in the ring, but Fritz forced him into the ring after David's death. After suffering a shoulder injury in 1985 on a tour of Israel, Mike was forced to have surgery. Shortly after, it was discovered that he had suffered from toxic shock syndrome, a rarity in men, and according to Ric Flair, was forced back into the ring by Fritz much too early. Eventually, Mike had to retire after not being able to return to the ring at full strength anymore. He committed suicide in 1987 by intentionally overdosing on tranquilizers. Fuck, man. Fritz Von Eric, born September 3rd, 1969 in Dallas, Texas. Chris Von Eric was the youngest, shortest, and least athletic of the Von Eric family. He had many attempts to succeed in the squared circle due to an incredible love of wrestling that kept him going despite numerous injuries. He managed one major feud with Percy Pringle in the USWA/World Class, but his career did not take off like the rest of the families, most likely because of his size, especially back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. You needed to be a really big guy. It's not like nowadays where you've got the AJ Styles and the Finn Balor's and you got these littler guys that are actually making a name for themselves, you know. And you got like Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins isn't a small guy, but I mean, he isn't a Hulk Hogan big guy. That's what I'm kind of talking about. Now, the rest of the Von Eric family were pretty fucking big. And this guy right here, Chris, he would have been big in normal standards, but when it came to wrestling, he was smaller. After several years of not being able to succeed in the wrestling business, Chris became depressed and frustrated. He was also heartbroken over the loss of his brothers, and he committed suicide in 1991. It's just a really sad fucking story, man. That's kind of why we go over all of the mental health stuff before we go over these episodes. 99% of these episodes that we cover, even when it comes to the alien episodes, any of the paranormal episodes, you have the conspiracy episodes, you always run into mental health. You always run into something that has to do with the mental health system, whether it be the mental health system breaking down or the mental health system helping something or explaining something away by some type of mental disease or mental malfunction that might be happening with somebody. Not to put anybody down, but sometimes that's what it is, you know. Not all the time you hearing voices or seeing something is because you actually saw it or heard it. You know, our minds play tricks on us, and sometimes they play tricks on us a little too much, and we need to go get help. So that's the tragic story of the Von Eric family. There was a third generation. We have Ross Von Eric. Ross Von Eric is the stage name of David Ross Atkinson. He is the son of Kevin Von Eric and the grandson of Fritz Von Eric and the heir to the Atkinson family name and Von Eric legacy. Ross, like his father before him, is also a football player. He is also an alumni of Billy Ryan High School in Denton, Texas. And you got Lacey Von Eric, the first girl that we're really talking about in this story. Born on July 17th, 1986 in Dallas, Texas, she is the daughter of Carrie Von Erich, the Texas Tornado, and the granddaughter of Fritz Von Eric. Lacey signed a developmental deal with World Wrestling Entertainment on August 7th, 2007. She was assigned to Florida Championship Wrestling in Tampa, where she made her debut on September 15th, 2007, managing Billy Kidman, of all people. Billy Kidman was a wrestler in WCW, and he worked his way down to FCW, which was before we had NXT. We had Florida Championship Wrestling, which was our minor leagues. On September 25th, 2007, Lacey then appeared as the valet for Ryan O'Reilly alongside with Maurice, who is married to The Miz. Now, on October 9th, 2007, Lacey made her in-ring debut in a loss against Natty Neidhart, which is Natalia now, Jim Neidhart's daughter. She was released from her developmental contract in late 2007 and concentrated solely on modeling ever since. But that's all we got on wrestling deaths here, you guys. Very sad stories. And, you know, it's near and dear to my heart because it is wrestling. And, you know, I like sharing these stories, and I like making people aware of what's happening behind the scenes when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Because there's a lot of stuff that people don't see on the screen when they're watching wrestling, and they don't really think about. There's all these bumps and bruises and stuff like that. It takes a toll on people outside of the ring. And it causes a lot of mental problems. and it causes just a lot of problems, period. Even if it's not shots to the head, if you break your leg and you can't wrestle anymore, that's going to cause mental problems. Because all of a sudden, the thing that you love, you can't do anymore. And that's part of the reason that some of them killed themselves. Now, the Von Erichs, again, it was almost like a Kennedy curse. It's like they couldn't get away from it. It's a very sad story. But my heart goes out to the entire Von Erich family and to the families of any of the wrestlers that were lost. Especially in the last couple of years here that we've lost too many. But we care about you, co-conspirators. Care about everybody around the world. Don't have an opinion on this episode, so I'm just going to go straight into this. We love you guys. Love everybody. So if you need help, please get help. The Suicide Lifeline number is 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. If you need help, please get help. Also, you can find the link to the Suicide Lifeline on theconspiracyasylum.com on the sidebar. And while you're there, click around, see what you like. We got fan art on there. We've got the links to all of our Twitters and the Facebooks and the Instagrams and the Patreon. $1, $10 gets you 2 bonus episodes every month. Plus ad-free, sometimes early releases of our episodes. Plus a 15% off coupon to our Etsy store. And you can check out our Etsy store on there to see if you like anything. And also, if you want a free postcard and a free sticker, just hit us up on there. You can leave a comment on theconspiracyasylum.com, or you can email us at theconspiracyasylum@gmail.com, and just let us know what your favorite episode is and your opinion on that topic, and drop us your address too, and do it in a DM. Don't do it as like a comment on Facebook. I don't want everybody knowing. I'm sure you don't either, but sometimes that happens, is somebody will just blast it out on Facebook or something like that. I encourage you to do it in a DM and let us know what your address is, and I'll send that out as soon as I can. So we love you guys. Stay safe. Be nice to each other. That's all I got. Padded cell is now open. You may leave. Bye, co-conspirators. Bye.